And welcome to the Royal Beat, the show that brings you up to date with all that's happening in the House of Windsor. Coming up on today's show, Charles hosts his first state visit, and we look ahead to Prince William and Kate's upcoming American trip and ask what kind of reception they can expect following Harry and Meghan's Oprah interview. Plus, we take a look back at the devastating fire of Windsor Castle 30 years on. And to guide us through all of this today, I'm joined by three of our favourites. The Royal Editor of the Daily Mirror, Russell Myers, is with us. Nice to see you, Russ. Editor-in-Chief of Majesty Magazine, Ingrid Seward, and Royal Historian and Correspondent Wesley Kerr. How are you all? Good?
Very well.
Good.
We haven't drawn breath over the last few minutes. It's going to be a lively one.
Yes, it's going to be a lively one. Well, and for good reason. First state visit. Obviously, Charles is no stranger to a state visit, but this is his first time as monarch. Wesley, how will the history books remember this one?
All the king's horses and all the king's men. And what I thought standing on the Mall that day was there was no diminution of ceremony. People that said, oh, it'll be slimmed down. The grand bits of the monarchy, I think are still in place. Quite decent crowds on the Mall and a very, very happy feeling. It happened to be one of the few days in London when it didn't rain.
Yeah.
And everybody looked the part. The Queen, that blue was wonderful in the carriage. The King looked very happy. President Ramaphosa looked happy. Kate somehow looks tall in a carriage. So I thought it was very powerful. It was the only thing that was scaled down from the previous state visits is that the head of state, the visiting head of state can't stay at Buckingham Palace at the moment because of the renovations.
Yes.
So he was staying in a hotel. And whereas a few years ago a state visit would be 3 or 4 days, it was really just 2 days. So there was a day of ceremonial at the palace at the Westminster Abbey and then a visit to Kew the next day and the City of London.
Yeah.
But it was a scale down in that sense. But in terms of the banquet and the reception, it was just like old times, really.
Business as usual. What was interesting, Ingrid, was we started to see how the King is going to play the family members around him and put them to work. So, for example, you mentioned Kew. We saw Prince Edward overseeing that trip. We saw the Prince and Princess of Wales kind of seconded out to welcome the President and his wife when they first arrived and escort them to the palace. Is Charles showing his hand now?
I think Charles has shown his hand right from the very beginning. And yes, it's traditional that the Prince and Princess of Wales would meet the visiting head of state, but they actually went to, they went to the hotel and greeted them there and then escorted them, as you said, to Horse Guards Parade. But I also noticed at the banquet that it was much less flamboyant than when the Queen gave state banquets. There were less flowers, no huge bowls of fruit, because this is very Charles. Let's be green. Let's get all the flowers from the hothouses at Windsor and Sandringham, and let's just use what we've got. So I noticed that particularly. I think it looked quite different. It looked magnificent, and they had all the crystal and the porcelain and the gold, but it just was different, and so he has already put his touch to it.
That's nice to see, isn't it? I mean, the headlines really focused in on, certainly visually, Catherine, Princess of Wales. We're seeing her step forward more and more now, aren't we, Russ?
Well, certainly. I mean, a huge occasion. Talk about sort of slimmed down and sustainable, whilst people sort of drinking out of golden cups. It seems a bit ludicrous sometimes. However, I think Ingrid's exactly right. This was something that the King put his stamp on straight away, and then you had the supporting actors, as it were, not taking the shine away from the occasion. And the fact that they did meet the President, his wife actually didn't come because she had an eye operation, so she cancelled right at the last minute. But the President was there, he was staying at the Corinthia, them coming to meet him, and then, I mean, looking absolutely resplendent at the banquet.
But obviously, I mean, as much as this is him and the Queen Consort setting out their stall, there's a genuine reason for these state visits. They are encouraged by the government to hold them, and this is where we start to see them exerting their soft power. So our relationship with South Africa is long, as the Queen had an extraordinary tie with the country and one of its most memorable leaders.
As does the King.
As does the King,
And he said in both in his speech, he kicked it off by commenting, of course, about the Queen and Nelson Mandela's famous relationship, referring to each other on first-name terms, something that's sort of transcended the ages. And indeed, Charles has been to South Africa many times and met Mandela and was able to draw on those anecdotes. And you had a sense of, I mean, this was planned long before the Queen's sad passing, and Charles said definitely still wanted to go ahead with it. Welcomed the President, was very keen that would be his first state visit, and I think you had a sense of familiarity.
And friendship.
And friendship and warmth
and
as well.
Goodwill, yeah, a lot of goodwill.
It was Harry's first trip to Africa.
Yes,
it's when Harry fell in love with Africa, because after Diana's death, Charles took 13-year-old Harry to Africa, and they met Mandela. They went to Pretoria to his presidential house and met him with the Spice Girls.
That's
and then the Spice Girls gave a concert in Johannesburg.
Yeah, that was in 97,
and then I think they went to
wasn't it?
Rorke's Drift. They did all, and Harry just fell so in love with Africa. And William was quite jealous that Harry sort of got to Africa first.
But it's continuity and change. I mean, these links, which were once imperial links, and the difficult history was referred to both by the President and the King.
Yes.
But also the modern history and that sense of transformation. And it's interesting in terms of soft power. I mean, the King met recently the President of Nigeria, another huge important African country. He's met the King of Jordan, he's met the King of Spain. But in terms of the visits, so Camilla had to the races, she had people from a place in Brixton, where black people ride, and she had them to Ascot. They went to an exhibition of African fashion at the Victoria and Albert Museum, which the King referred to in this speech. So I think we see continuity and we see change. We see the past and we see modern Britain. He's using 6 of the languages that among the 9 that he used in South Africa. So in a way, that's reminiscent of when the Queen spoke in Gaelic on her famous.
Yeah.
But that mixture of appropriateness with a sort of warm and human touch. So his speech was slightly less formal than her speech, but there was content, there was talk of climate change and biodiversity, and one had the feeling that you didn't always have with Her Majesty's speeches, that he'd probably written it all himself.
Absolutely. Also, there was a job to be done here, right? There was an element of an expectation, certainly from the government, that he would talk shop and help relations. I mean, how does that work, and is he getting it right, Russ?
Well, as you mentioned, that it's on an invitation of the Foreign Office. The President had also been to Downing Street to have a sort of bilateral meeting with Rishi Sunak. But, as he says, soft power, and this is exactly what Charles is very, very good at. He is adept at, he's been doing this job for an awful long time, and to have someone who is such a great partner as the President. Yeah, I mean, and the fact is, we have a long and rich history with South Africa, and indeed this can hold a light up to the other African nations that we are undoubtedly courting in a sort of a post-Brexit world, I suppose.
Yeah, well, 30% of the UK's trade with Africa is said to come from South Africa.
Right.
So it's really important that he managed to land that message with the President. He then touched very briefly on what he called, I believe, the sorrows of the past, Wesley.
Yes, it was a colony. There was brutality involved. There was the Boer War. And then, interestingly, of course, Britain was against apartheid from before it began in the late 40s, and that was the reason why the Queen and her parents went on that tour, to stop apartheid. And then Britain campaigned against apartheid. So Britain's role in the history of South Africa is a kind of mixed role, but I think in the last 30, 40 years has been a positive role. And there's a lot that the two countries can do together going forward, not least on the issue of climate change and biodiversity, as well as trade, which was a strong theme. So I think that Charles is more willing to talk about difficult issues in the past than the Queen was.
Yeah, he feels more comfortable, it would seem, Ingrid, having difficult conversations, including reflecting on the very recent loss of his mother.
Charles has this wonderful delivery. I mean, I always think he's like a sort of Shakespearean actor. He really knows how to give a speech, and I feel that had he had the time, he's been so busy, he probably would have learnt half that speech, but he obviously had to refer, you know, to the written word, because it was quite a long speech too. And I think that he always speaks with huge affection, A, about his wife, my darling wife, and B, about his late mother. And I think that was absolutely charming. And he brings a little anecdote.
He does, yes.
He makes it
He's a great
live,
orator.
He makes it sing. He really does. And I think that was a wonderful delivery and a wonderful speech.
Wow. First state visit done. He's got that one under his belt. But now the King has begun the process of increasing the number of royals who can stand in for him for official duties, proposing Princess Anne and Prince Edward as additions. In a statement read to both Houses of Parliament last week, the King said he would be most content should the Regency Act be amended to allow his two siblings to deputise for him when required. So what does this actually mean? And have Harry and Andrew been left in play?
Well, I suppose for all intents and purposes, yes, but no. I mean, this
is very confusing, Russ.
Yeah,
break it down.
I will try and break it down for you. So the reason why this has sort of become into public consciousness, I mean, none of us would probably have ever heard of councillors of state, certainly anyone sort of outside working in this arena. But when the Queen was in ill health and...
or abroad.
Or, well, it really came into the sort of the I guess, let's say, public consciousness, because when the Queen was in ill health over the last few months of her life, and you had the Prince of Wales, Charles, and the Duke of Cambridge at the time, both away on business, on foreign tours, then other people would have had to step in and deputise for the monarch. And that is exactly what councillors of state do.
For example, we saw Prince William and then Prince Charles stepping in during the state opening of Parliament.
Well, they were, but there was an occasion when they were both out of the country, so other people had to step in. Two of those people were the Duke of York and the Duke of Sussex. So the fact is, one's left of his own volition, one has left out the back door because he was a sort of persona non grata, and we don't necessarily want to, the public don't want to see them taking hold of state business anymore. And so the family have seen, well, Charles has seen right that they won't have anything to do with it in the future.
So talk me through this, Wesley. Give me the history on this, because in order to be a councillor of state, you have to be in line to the throne. Is that right?
You have to be in line to the throne, immediately in line, or you have to be the spouse of the monarch. But obviously the spouse of the monarch normally travels with the monarch, so it's kind of out of play if the king's away. So you need to be really one of the 3 or 4 heirs in close proximity. The duties are actually quite limited. I don't think you can sign Acts of Parliament, but you can have you can attend the council, the Privy Council. You can meet ambassadors. So they're fairly. But in an emergency, you could, I suppose, declare a state of emergency. So these powers are rarely exercised. So it's
30
really,
times in recent decades they've been exercised.
Yeah, they're not. It's not really actual power. It's really symbolic things. It's just saying that there must always be a monarch or the representative of the monarch in the country. But in effect, Andrew and Harry are being removed from that responsibility.
But they haven't been. They haven't been removed.
Well, it's a fudge, because the fact is they didn't want to remove them completely, because that would have been terribly embarrassing. And Charles is all about unity within the family. I mean, he does understand that there is public feeling towards those two in particular. That
most specifically Prince Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that some people are aggrieved at how Harry had gone about treating his family. I mean, there was obviously an awful lot of support for the way that he did leave the family and chose his own destiny. But I don't think people agree with the fact that if you leave, you should then be able to deputise for the monarch.
Apart from anything else, he doesn't live in the country, so it'd be rather hard for him to deputise for the monarch. But it is basically an assertion of saying that my other brother, Edward, and my sister Anne are very, very important to me, and they're very senior members of the royal family. So I think the public would be with this, that they should be the stand-ins.
But also, Anne was a councillor of state for 20 years.
So was Edward.
Oh no, 30 years, Anne, and 20 years Edward.
But they were both moved off of the list, so to speak.
When Prince William was born.
Well, no, when Prince William became 21.
And so it's basically the adult members of the family who are next in line. So he's not going to sort of get rid of the line of succession, because oddly enough, the Duke of York and the Duke of Sussex remain in the line of succession.
Well, what he's done, which is what I thought was quite clever in terms of diplomacy, you tell me if you agree, is despite keeping Harry and Andrew effectively in play on paper. He asked for an amendment that looks to preclude royals who have not, in the immediate preceding 2 years, undertaken royal duties on a regular basis from carrying out that role. So that automatically kind of excludes them from that, doesn't it?
Well, we'll see what happens when Parliament actually decides. I mean, the key thing about a constitutional monarchy is it's up to Parliament. So whether that amendment passes is up to Parliament, and we won't know that till next week in practice. But the truth is, they've been removed and will never carry out these duties.
And I mean, listen, Anne and Edward, very safe pair of hands. Anne was moved out of that role when Prince William turned 21. I believe Edward when Harry became 21.
Yes.
So this is a path well trodden for them. And right now, safe hands is what
solid,
the royals need.
Dependable, charming, and at engagements. They're professional royals, and the great thing about monarchy is there's always an alternative. I mean, Anne, who I spent a couple of hours with, touring a cemetery of all things in the summer, completely delightful, charming, attention to detail. Her husband, Sir Tim Lawrence, I mean, you couldn't meet a nicer person. So they may get less publicity, but if the royal family is about sustaining charitable activity, representing Britain, these are terrific stand-ins for the King.
I thought it was quite interesting, Russ, that we've got Princess Anne was absent, the Princess Royal was absent from the state banquet because she's currently in the Falkland Islands.
Well, you talk about publicity.
You asked to cover the trip.
I did ask to cover.
No thanks.
And they said no, which I was quite surprised about. But I mean,
isn't that great though? In so many ways.
But as Wesley says, and I think that Arthur Edwards had said beforehand, they just treat the press like telegraph poles. They're not really interested in whether you're there or not. So fair enough, they didn't want us to travel.
I spoke to Sir Tim for 20 minutes at a function the other day. He just wandered up and chatted. It wasn't like an official...
I'm sure they're particularly polite.
But they're polite to the people they meet. They think it's about... So they think it's about the Falklanders that they're meeting.
Rather than the press that are following them.
Well,
They're not playing
we're not
to the
asking
gallery.
to tag along, but in terms of being part of the gig, as it were. But I think that this could have got a lot of traction. There's not really a lot of royal news. I mean, most people, man on the street doesn't really care about the state banquet, I would argue. But this was a great opportunity to get some more coverage.
Just an interesting pushback and attitude from the Princess Royal.
Very much so. Yeah.
I mean, it's not something, for example, that you could imagine coming from any other royal office.
No, gosh.
You go, we'd love to follow you and cover your trip to the Falklands.
And it's the 40th anniversary of the war, meeting the Falklanders. It's there's been some great pictures that I've seen from the places they've been, but we fair enough.
But we saw recently, I know we've got Kate and William going to Boston. I know you're on that trip in a matter of weeks. But Anne recently went to New York. No press coverage. Got herself there on a commercial flight.
She loves
carried her own bags.
But we know about it, so there was a bit of coverage, you see, of her carrying her own bags. I mean, it's interesting.
It's clever, soft
power.
Is
public relations about being nice to us?
But Anne wasn't always nice.
Or is it about letting the message seep out? I mean, it's quite... And of course, as Ingrid is saying, there is a history of Anne and the press, which we remember from quite a long time ago.
What Anne used to... I mean, she'd be delighted there were no press in the Falklands. But what she used to do is she would look at you, but she'd look straight through you. Would she? Yes. You know that glaze you can put on when you don't want to see someone? And also, famously, she's been incredibly rude to the press when they've asked her questions, and she's given a really snappy... She's very, very like her late father.
When Philip was in hospital and they asked, how is your father? And she said, she sort of laughed at them and
in hospital?
scoffed. Yeah, he said, how should I know? Just went into the engagement. Couldn't care less whether you were there or not.
Do you know what, though?
It's quite funny.
As a 9-year-old schoolgirl, I was invited to meet Princess Anne at Gatcombe Park, having raised some money for one of her charities. She could not have been kinder, more tactile, softer. I was in tears because I was really upset with my appearance on the day. And she gave me a hug. She walked me around the house. When I told her a house smelled of dog, she said, well, you're right, it does. So the other side of Princess Anne that I experienced as a young child, that was my first taste and touch of a princess. I thought she was absolutely formidable.
And that was the Princess Anne I spent a couple of hours with this summer in the cemetery. It's about the duty that you're doing, not necessarily the coverage that you get. And I suppose she would just say that over the long term, the real you is exposed, and that's is that not the royal family that we want?
Exactly. I like a princess that wears jeans and smells of dogs. What can I say?
No, our house smelled of dogs, didn't it?
Yeah, not her. Thank you for the correction, Ingrid. Okay, now just over a week ago, King Charles marked his 74th birthday, at which point it was announced that he'd been appointed Ranger of Windsor Great Park, one of the country's oldest landed estates. And the King has big shoes to fill, because this is a role that was held by his late father, the Duke of Edinburgh, who relished it for almost 7 decades.
I mean, it's an important role, and he wasn't appointed. He appointed himself as Ranger of Windsor Great Park.
The Duke of Edinburgh?
The King appointed himself, because it's been vacant since the Duke died, and the Queen could have appointed Charles, but didn't. I rather thought it might go to William, who actually lives there. But it's one of the great estates in the United Kingdom, 5,000 acres, superbly managed, but not actually owned by the King. So, but he will be able to influence the management. So actually, Philip didn't get to remove those lime trees, but Philip has removed lots of trees and planted marvellous new avenues. He's introduced a vineyard. It's very, very sustainably managed. I suspect it'll be managed more organically now. There's 2 farms.
Yes.
There's 1,000-year-old oak trees. It is the most amazing place with public access, although not by car.
These are just some of the changes that the Duke of Edinburgh introduced. He made it more accessible to the public. He was visionary, wasn't he, Ingrid?
Yes, he was incredibly visionary, and he set up the Windsor Farm Shop, which is where they which is now a sort of meeting place. When there's great visits and ceremonies at Windsor, all the guests, for instance, were at the Queen's funeral.
I've got venison in my fridge from the farm shop.
Oh, you would have.
I go there every couple of months.
But
and it's also a very sustainable business. Makes a lot of money. So I think that Charles there is it's much beloved by his mother and father as their principal home. He doesn't often spend nights there, but I think that he will be spending more time there.
It's definitely a passion project for the Duke of Edinburgh's, wasn't it? I mean, we see it in that documentary. I would implore you to watch it. It's very funny in places where he walks around. I mean, there's one point where he walks into the farm shop and everyone double takes, and he's just inspecting. I mean, he really did make his mark. Is this a way for Charles, do you think, to carry on feeling close to his father and the work that meant so much to him, Ross? Well,
I think he's changed the landscape of several of the estates. It's Sandringham, completely organic farming now. He'll make some changes to Windsor. I mean, but like Ingrid said, the Duke of Edinburgh is a complete visionary. I mean, he changed an awful lot. So the fact that I think he'll just be sort of fostering what his father taught him, really.
I think so, yes. I mean, he was full of admiration for what his father had done. And after all, Philip was the first member of the immediate royal family to talk out about climate change, to talk about overpopulation, to talk about the possible things would be a great water shortage.
Yeah, back in the 50s. I mean,
back in the 50s,
being ridiculed back in the late 60s, 70s, really. Yeah. Well, he was talking about these things in the 50s, so real pioneer. And
what's great is that he uses the innovations that excite him, puts them in play to prove that they work, and then builds a case to roll them out. Now, this takes time and energy and passion, but that's something we witnessed the Duke of Edinburgh doing year in, year out, across so many causes that meant a lot to him.
He always said, the Duke of Edinburgh, that there was no point starting something if you weren't prepared to finish it. And that was one of Lord Mountbatten's sort of mantras. If you're going to start it, you've got to be prepared to finish it and be patient and see it through. Yeah. And he was brilliant at that.
And what you get with monarchy is a long-term vision. And it may be criticised that they own lots of land or control lots of land, so they better make sure that they run it fantastically well in the most innovative way. And that's what has continued through the generations. And William, of course, now is in charge of the large estates of the Duchy of Cornwall, which his father has run for 50 years, and he will tweak them. So I think in the areas where they've got direct control, they've got to be exemplars. And I think in the last 2 or 3 generations, they have been exactly that.
Absolutely. Now, in other news this week, Russ, it's been reported that King Charles plans to, pay many of his staff a generous bonus to help with the cost of living crisis. But there's also been talk of a large number of potential redundancies across his residences as he kind of goes out of one role and into the other, from the Prince of Wales to
Sure. I mean, and let's take the payments, where it's a cost of living crisis, not only in the UK, across many countries at the moment. And Charles is particularly in tune with that. He definitely is aware of his position. I think it speaks volumes of what sort of person he is, that he's recognised this before Christmas as well. So there's a lot of the staff will be getting £600 sort of bonus payments, if you will, to help with them with their bills. But also, he does have to wear another hat, and this is to streamline not only the monarchy but the staff. The reason this is coming was I was told by several members of staff who came to me and saying, you know, they're particularly worried about their futures. There was over 100 were given sort of notice of redundancies very, very shortly after the Queen had passed away. One may say, well, you could rightly assume that they would be made redundant. However, we are coming up to Christmas. People are finding it very, very difficult to get by at the moment, and it's just an unfortunate part of the job, I think, for him.
I agree, yeah. On the 30th of November, the Prince and Princess of Wales are going to be heading off to the US, and the visit is a 3-day trip built around the annual Earthshot Prize, which we all know William founded. But following Harry and Meghan's explosive Oprah interview, the trip is also being viewed by many as a chance to improve the monarchy's standing in the eyes of the American public across the Atlantic. So Russ, you're going on this trip, you're going to be following them as they work their way around, starting in Boston, is that right?
It's only in Boston. I mean, I can't tell you a lot about it because a lot of it, the schedule is actually embargoed. But what they are there for is to shine a light on the Earthshot Prize,
which is an extraordinary project.
Fantastic. Over 10 years, giving away £50 million to the most sort of weird and wonderful ideas to try and solve the planet's biggest crises, I suppose. And this is something that William has really invested in. It's great that Kate is going with him as well. I think they will have a fantastic reception. I've seen the schedule, and there's a lot to look forward to. They're going to be getting in and amongst the crowds. They're going to be meeting local people. It won't be all to do with the environment, but Boston is really sort of a pioneer of sustainability. So again, I'm a bit saddened that it's not longer. I think for an autumn tour to just be 3 days, and it hasn't been described as a tour, it's just a visit. Yeah. That the last time we saw them out and about was in the Caribbean. So, but yeah, listen, everybody's doing baby steps at the moment. They're getting used to new roles and what have you, and I do think they'll get a fantastic reception out. Do you
think that the Harry and Meghan interview with Oprah damaged their stock, Ingrid?
I think it damaged their stock briefly. Right. There was such a furore. It was so high profile. And then when everybody started knocking it down and saying, well, actually, they're not telling the truth. This is, and then when she sort of said we were married before, I mean, Meghan said some very weird things. And I think in long term, it was very damaging for them. Short term, I think they had everyone on their side. But to my understanding of the Americans I know, which is quite a few, they all love the Princess of Wales. I mean, the current Princess of Wales, they adore Diana. No one will replace her, but they love the Princess of Wales now. And I think they think she's absolutely gorgeous, and she's a princess. To them, Meghan isn't a princess.
Do you think, I mean, how is it going for Meghan and Harry now that they've started to get product out under some of these content deals they've got? How's the podcast doing, for example?
Well, the podcast got off to a great start. It currently was in the 70s in the charts this week. It has dived. It's gone up and down. They're doing some sort of weird video for Elton John this week, which I felt was just a bit of a mishmash of the two of them paying tribute to Elton John after he was giving I think it was a National Medal of Congress. They haven't found their groove, and in one sense they are still trying to create news for themselves and things to do. But listen, there's a lot of pressure on them.
You talk about Kate and William going over there trying to find their feet in new roles. Would you say that is the case for Meghan and Harry?
Kate and William are going to do a job. A city with huge historic links with Britain, very important in America. The Queen made a famous visit to Boston, so I think there'll be lots of comparable images. And it's a job about sustainability, about the Earthshot Prize, and it's the heir to the throne. I'm not sure what the Los Angeles couple, what their job is really. I'm not sure how interesting they are. We're interested in what they have to say about the British royal family. They're getting a prize. I'm not quite sure what the prize is they're getting in New York from Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg. Is it apparently because they have campaigned against structural racism in Britain? I don't really think I take my guidance on racism in Britain from them. So I'll be interested to see what they say when they get the prize. But their role is undefined. Yeah, whereas I think the Prince and Princess of Wales have got a clear role.
Now, also, could you even name the numbers of awards that Harry and Meghan seem to have
For what
scooped up?
exactly?
But for what?
For doing an interview?
We don't know what any of them are for. And they seem to have scooped up an awful lot.
Well, again, they're the hot property of the moment, and then that's what...
Well, they
look at
were.
the list of people who are given these awards, and it's normally A-listers who are the sort of the flavour of the month.
Well, let's see. OK. A story that we will continue to cover, and looking forward to hearing how your 3 days in Boston go. OK, now this week saw the 30th anniversary of the fire which devastated Windsor Castle and became one of the lowest points in the year that Her late Majesty called her Annus Horribilis. Did I say that correctly?
Horribilis.
Horribilis, thank you very much. I always get it wrong. Let's just establish, how did the fire start and what scale did the damage kind of run to, Wesley?
And I was there most of that day, and it's one of the most memorable days in my life, really. And as a journalist, a shock. As somebody had grown up near Windsor, just astonishing to think that so much of this amazing castle would have gone up in flames. And there had been restoration work going on. So that meant that lots of the artefacts were not in the castle, although we saw others being removed at the last minute. And a lamp apparently set light to a curtain in a place, spotlight in the private chapel, maybe a halogen light.
Yes.
Nobody's entirely sure of this. Set light to some curtains. So the fire had already spread through various ceilings, ancient sort of gaps in walls before people knew about it, and it eventually damaged about 100 rooms. Now, of course, it destroyed interiors, but I suppose this ancient building turned out to be very robust. But the scale of the damage at first seemed completely, it will never recover, and it must have been such a shock for the Queen. It was the year that 3 of her children's marriages had broken up. So it is the year when she made that famous speech, and she was personally deeply, deeply upset by it. It was a catastrophic blow, because she must have felt, as the monarch that's living in this house, which has been in my family since the 1060s, when William the Conqueror created it, I'm the custodian. So she had failed as the custodian. But in fact, there's a sort of phoenix-like element to this story, because within 5 years there'd been an astonishing restoration. But there was a big row about who was to pay for the restoration, because the government the following Sunday said, you, the public, will pay. And there was then enormous sort of backpedaling. And by the end of the next week, it had been announced that the Queen and Charles were to pay income tax. Buckingham Palace was to open to the public for the first time. And that actually, these things turned out to be very good things. So as often in the Queen's reign, a difficulty was turned to a positive.
It engendered a lot of change and modernisation. You're quite right. At the time, the Queen wasn't paying, for example, capital gains or income tax on some of her what would be deemed as investments. That changed, and in order to pay for the renovations, they did open the palaces and make them much more public spaces, Ingrid. But at the time, when we saw the Queen arrive on the day, Philip was abroad. It was their 45th wedding anniversary, the day of the fire. He was abroad in Argentina. The Queen was at Buckingham Palace. Andrew was the only member of the family on site. She arrived, we saw her there, headscarf on, wellies, devastated by there were 225 firefighters trying to bring that under control. And from 3 miles away, you could see the flames, the smoke billowing from Windsor, couldn't you?
You certainly could. And the Queen was absolutely devastated. It was her, so-called, it was her favourite home. But remember, she doesn't own Windsor. She is a custodian. And I think Wesley's absolutely right when she felt that she'd let herself down because she'd somehow allowed this to happen. And then she was also quite hurt, I think, when the British public said, well, we're not, the taxpayer, we're not paying for the restoration of Windsor Castle, but, it's a national monument. So she actually paid £2 million of her own money. and then raised the rest through opening Buckingham Palace. And the other hero of the day was Prince Andrew, believe it or not, because
Not often you hear that said these days, is it?
Yeah, he spent so much time there as a child that he knew all the nooks and crannies and secret doors and passages, so he could direct people, say, look, take that painting out there, go there, and he was really a hero, and the Queen was so grateful to him.
And only 2 artefacts were actually destroyed.
I know,
so
isn't
lots
that
of
amazing?
interiors went, but they were painstakingly reconstructed. So actually, if you visit Windsor now, it's actually better to visit. You know, there's a cafe. So there were areas which hadn't been open to the public, which now are open. There was a sort of medieval kitchen that was revealed. So what we're good at in this country is restoring historic buildings. And
Yeah.
there'd been a fire at Hampton Court a few years before. So the restoration became something that the monarchy actually sort of recovered around.
Well, 5 years later, I mean, you're right, an incredible restoration effort, and financed largely by putting revenue streams in place to some of the private houses that had never really been opened into the scale that they are now, the private residences of the royal family. On her 50th wedding anniversary, she spoke with quite deep emotion, didn't she? She said, it was the best anniversary present we could have wished for. I can't begin to describe what it means to us to finally have Windsor back.
Well, I think you're going to see a bit of a repetition of what happened then, because Charles is very keen about opening more of the palaces, certainly the ones that aren't being used. Windsor Castle will probably be one of them, will be opened more. Balmoral will become some sort of, he has plans to make it some sort of museum, certainly to bring in some more money, to make it more sustainable, I suppose, for the royal family and for the country.
But Russell, what people do love, especially visiting from abroad, they love the idea that they're going into a palace or a castle where the Queen or somebody is actually living, although you don't see them. So that is quite important, that there should be a presence there, rather than...
Why it's important that he still stays there.
So he still
hasn't
stays
been doing
there,
so far,
yeah.
but it's quite
I'll give him a minute. He's just turned 74,
Well,
he's become a ranger, a king, he's exhausted.
He's got lots of houses, of course, that he loves Sandringham, and he likes Burcourt more than he likes Balmoral. So there is an issue of lots of houses. Now, in practice, most of them are already open to the public, but Buckingham Palace, it's only for 2 months.
Yeah.
Balmoral, it's only been for 2 or 3 months, so I think there'll be much more emphasis on that. So give praise to the Queen. It was she that opened them all to the public, but I think there's going to be far more emphasis on that. Just as he always meets people on engagements. Yesterday in London, he did an engagement, stayed extra time, a crowd had gathered, and he moved among them for 20 minutes. Now the Queen probably didn't do that towards the end of her reign, so I think there's much more emphasis on it being a public and open monarchy.
Well, let's hope so. A huge thanks to all of my guests today, to Russell, to Ingrid and to Wesley. We're going to be back in 3 weeks' time with a brand new episode. Until then, don't forget you can carry on the conversation with us on any of our social media channels. We truly love reading your comments. And to all of our viewers tuning in from America, we'd like to take the opportunity to wish you a very happy holidays. Don't forget, you can watch the latest episode of The Royal Beat at trueroyalty.tv.